The portrait gallery at the Albrecht-Kemper Museum of Art spans centuries and are some of the oldest paintings in our collection. John Wollaston was the son of a London portrait painter. He spent about a dozen years painting over 300 portraits in the English colonies along the eastern seaboard in America. His paintings follow the typical English style of formulaic poses and a formality popular with patrons of that time period. The almond-shaped eyes and similar clothing are good ways to spot Wollaston portraits. This portrait is of Benjamin Smith, a wealthy banker and merchant in Charleston, South Carolina. Shortly after painting this portrait, Wollaston went back to England in 1767. Jeremiah Zeus was a native of Switzerland who worked out of Charleston, South Carolina from 1735 to 1774. Colonial artists like Zeus had to be territorial because there was not enough business to support more than a single artist in any one city. But Zeus had little competition and became a wealthy and respectable member of society. Like many of his American contemporaries, Zeus's paintings are formulaic and repetitive, depicting the elite in their finery. In fact, many of his portraits of women are painted in the same dress and jewelry fashionable in England at the time. Zeus painted not only portraits, but anything he could, including crests and coats of arms on coaches. He taught art lessons to both men and women and was a true entrepreneur. These portraits, attributed to the late 1760s, are of Mr. and Mrs. Hayward. Colonel Daniel Hayward, who owned a plantation outside of Charleston, signed the Declaration of Independence. Jane Elizabeth was Hayward's second wife, who likely died in childbirth, as Daniel married once more and had many children. Gilbert Stuart was the greatest American portraitist of his generation. A Rhode Islander, Stuart was trained by Scottish painter Cosmo Alexander in the traditional colonial portrait style, before apprenticing in London with the famous painter Benjamin West. John and Justina Anderson Mackenzie were likely painted in 1788, while Stuart was working in Dublin. Stuart's paintings incorporate loose brushstrokes, which suggest shape while concentrating all of the detail on the expression and face of the sitter. Fleeing debt, he came to America, settled in Boston in 1805, and became one of America's most popular portraitists. He painted 6 American presidents, including George Washington, seen printed on the dollar bill. Rembrandt Peale was an American-born artist whose father was a portrait painter who named all of his children after famous painters. At the age of 17, he sat in with his father as he painted George Washington, and then used the sketch to make replica paintings. Peale studied under Benjamin West at the Royal Academy in London, and spent years copying old master works across Europe. He founded the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in 1805. Portraits are what paid the bills, especially those of Washington, 75 of which are known today. This painting may be the last one he finished before his death in 1860. George Caleb Bingham was born in Virginia, but moved to Missouri when he was a young boy. He started his portrait studio as a self-taught artist, but decided to get an education at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts and the National Academy of Design before he moved to Washington, D.C., painting famous politicians. He later moved to St. Louis, Missouri, and was eventually elected to the Missouri House of Representatives, actively opposing pro-slavery resolutions. In 1856, he took his family on the Grand Tour, studying old master paintings in Europe and studying at the Dusseldorf School of Painting. Upon returning to the States in 1859, he was again involved in politics and painting politicians' portraits. He volunteered for the Union during the Civil War and served in many political roles in Missouri throughout his lifetime. He was known as the Missouri Artist. The portrait of Missouri Senator Robert Wilson was painted in 1860. Wilson studied law and was a Union delegate and acting president of the Missouri Constitutional Convention.